Hello and welcome to today's video. So this time something a little bit different. I thought we'd discuss a burning question for quite a few collectors who I know, and I've been speaking to them about this, and that's what on earth happens to your collection when you die. So sit back, relax, and let's get to it. Okay then, I hope this isn't a bit too morbid. I mean, none of us know what might be around the corner, and in the last few years I've seen a few collectors sadly pass away, and in some cases their collections haven't really been dealt with in the way that perhaps I would want my collection to be dealt with. So I feel, I think it's a subject that needs to be discussed, even if it is a little bit delicate. So I popped a little question out on my community tab about what do other collectors think, and I've had a pretty good response, so I thought we'd go through a few of these responses now to open up the discussion a bit. So the first one is from my friend Richard over at Vintage SF. Very interested in this topic. Thank you for raising the question. My first thought is to let my immediate family choose books that they would like to keep, note those books with some financial value, and then donate the rest to the Children's Hospital book market. That way collectors in my hometown would get a fair crack at them. So that's a really good approach. It depends. See, I've thought about this quite a bit. Now, if you've got a collection which is, say, a couple of thousand books, for example, still that's a pretty sizable collection. Then what Richard's proposing, which is maybe have a little list of these are the expensive ones, you may want to keep those back, or perhaps not just give them away to charity, but maybe sell those yourself if that's what you want to do, or keep them as heirlooms. The notion of giving them away for other collectors and or readers to enjoy is definitely a very noble thing to do, and that would be fantastic. I think the problem becomes much harder when you're talking of a much bigger collection. So as I used an example there, a couple of thousand books, you might have 100 that are perhaps really collectible and will be worth selling individually. The rest of it, well, maybe not so much. But what happens if you've got 16,000 books or more, or a collection of 40,000 comics, or 10,000 records? What do you do then? And then I think that represents, it's a different problem entirely. But I think what Richard's suggesting there, and certainly offering books to the local charity, stuff that isn't really worth much, is a really good idea. Okay, this next comment is from Chris Hunt 4497. I have already specialist auctioned my vinyl collection. I would rather have the money now. If I had left it to another person to deal with, they would probably have just given the collection away. See, this raises another point. So my feeling is that if I want to maximize my potential collection and get back its monetary value so I can enjoy it, or I can invest it, or put it into something that I can pass on to my children, then the time to sell it is very much whilst I'm alive. And this is why at this exact stage in my life, 1 year ago approximately, I started disposing of the Star Wars collection, because I knew it was going to be a long job. And although I got rid of quite a bit in one hit to another dealer, which is always a fairly easy way to do it, there's still an awful lot left to do. And then there's other toy collections as well that need to be disposed of. And I would much rather do this and maximize the value of my items than just leave it to a relative when I die. I think if I was to go tomorrow, my wife would be in a real pickle with this stuff, let alone the fact that I've died. But I've died and left her what is in effect a burden, and I don't want my family to be burdened by the fact that I've been an obsessive collector my entire life. I'd much rather turn it around and have a very clear plan in place about how to dispose of the stuff when I die, basically. So, we'll get more onto that in a minute, but let's have another question. So the Great Dario says, I have a rather extensive sports collection. Cards, autographs, autographed jerseys, just to scratch the surface. Probably worth roughly 10,000. I do not have any children, so I have it to my sister to hold on to. Upon my death, they can sell it all and split the proceeds. I have a couple of nephews, but I don't really think they appreciate the collection all that much. So if you've got any sort of family member, then fantastic. I mean, when my grandpop died, my granddad, in the mid-70s, I was just a lad. He was also an obsessive collector, and I think I've got that gene because I do believe it's hereditary, the collecting gene that is. And he collected stamps, and he collected Toby jugs and china. And when he died, myself and my sister were able to choose any piece at all that we fancied. I didn't know what was valuable one piece from another, but I was just able to choose one piece as like an heirloom, and my sister chose a piece as well, and then the rest of it went off to be auctioned at Sotheby's. It was for the two separate collections in London. So that's what happened to it. So I've got like a Charles II statue, maybe about that sort of size. I'm not quite sure what my sister's got, but she's still got it, and I've still got my bits. So that's what we did. I mean, so it's quite a noble thing. So there are certain bits of my collection that I've saved to give to my sons. So, for example, when I was growing up, I had the Palatoy Star Wars Han Solo gun, and I still had it. It was my original one from when I was a kid. 35 years later, when my son was my sort of age, he was playing with it. We've still got that one now, and that's the sort of thing which I know it's a bit of a laugh, but it is part of my Star Wars collection. But at the same time, that bit is definitely his to pass on to his son or daughter if he ever ends up having children. So I think keeping a few pieces back, a few choice pieces, is definitely a very good idea, regardless of their monetary worth, just so you've got a bit of a souvenir of the collection and that person. So Mr. Sad Life 1 says, all going to my daughter, the books, everything. Though I have sold most of my vinyl to keep my book buys going. For my birthday last year, my daughter gifted me a second-hand laptop and a new scanner, and the laptop loaded with a book cataloguing system. She hopes I will have all my books on file before I die. I guess I'm in for a long life if this is to be achieved. I'm still buying, but nowhere near as many as I used to. Retirement has been a good slow downer. I'm still working. Basically I'm working full-time. I do part-time in my day job, and then the rest of the time I'm doing YouTube for you guys. And it's not retirement. I really am very, very busy. When I finally retire, do I want to spend my time being a dealer and offloading all this stuff, or do I want to try and get rid of as much as possible before I start I actually hit retirement? The way I look at my collection is the last thing I want left, basically, when I die, ideally would be the book collection, because it's something that I hope I can always pull a book off the shelf and enjoy reading it. That's my ultimate sort of aim. The toys and memorabilia and things like that, well, ultimately, you're never ever going to have enough room to really display it all properly. And I like to fill up display cases with old die casts and things like that. They don't cost a lot of money. They keep the shows interesting for me to actually go to. But at the same time, ultimately those will be going, and I'll hopefully just be left with my book library, which, if I leave clear enough instructions, will be fairly easy to get specialist dealers in to dispose of. Ben MGT says, to inherit or sell it on. I have a spreadsheet of everything I have with a current value. So that's another good point. Now, if I was to sell my penguin collection, for example, the way to absolutely maximize the value and its monetary worth would be to list every single book individually, the rare with the more common, and put it all into like a catalogue and send it out into the world. Now, if I was to die and I couldn't do that myself, and my wife was left with that, I wouldn't ask her to do it, even if I'd left a detailed list with, well, pull these rare ones out and stick them on eBay. I just wouldn't. There's a couple of reasons for that. One, if it's a non-book collector and they're trying to sell books, it's very, very difficult to know things about grading and various different editions and printings and things like that if you're not into it or if you're not an expert. So there is only really 2 or 3 penguin specialist dealers in the UK, and a collection of my sort of size, I just don't think they'd be able to handle it, any of them. So what I would probably do is, if I was alive I'd sell it myself through a catalogue, and I'd just bite the bullet. I'd spend probably a couple of years. That would be my job full time, just selling the collection. Maybe longer. It might even take longer than that. If I was to die, I would leave instructions for my wife to say, well, look, there are specialist book auctions, but they're mainly modern first editions or rare antiquarian. They're not really interested in paperbacks. However, you may remember earlier this year the Warren and Wignall auction up in Manchester. Now, I did a whole video on that. Now, what happened there? Clearly, there was a chap who was had an incredible collection of books, and he passed away, and the whole lot had been cleared out, whether it was by a relative or by a house clearance company, down to the auction house, Warren and Wignall, and they didn't do a bad job. They sorted it by publisher. They did it in runs. They did the penguins not as I would have done them. They sort of bunched the green ones together rather than doing it numerically. But the prices, because Warren and Wignall are an auctioneer which are part of the sale room, and now the saleroom.com are where any auction house can sign up to it, but their auctions are then put out to a national and even worldwide audience. So you're not just limited to your local hometown, for example. And consequently, the bidding in the room was pretty intense, but also online as well. And these little lots of books, some of them were going for absolute thousands. So it may be, if the auctioneer is big enough and they've got that worldwide coverage through the internet, through the saleroom.com, actually, if you were to put by publisher, my books are by publisher, and then by number, that may not be too bad a thing, and it would be the way, perhaps, for a relative or family member to get shown. All they'd really need to do would be to box it up and get it to the auctioneers. It may well be that the auctioneers themselves, if they realise what a sizable collection it's likely to be, would come down in a van and actually do it for you. And that's definitely the case for like toy auctioneers, for example, a comic book auctioneers. If someone dies and the relative is a bit stuck, give them a call, because they may well say, well, look, we'll send a van, we'll get it all appraised, we'll give you a rough idea of how much it's going to go for, and they'll take it from there. And that, once again, may be the best way for a relative to do it. So if you actually are dead and can't do it yourself, leave instructions about who to call. Who would you like to handle your collection? Who do you trust to handle your collection if you were to die? Right, Peter 2359. I collect comic books, but the only value is the pleasure I get from reading them. I hope that they will be given to second-hand store, preferably one for charity, because that's where I got many of them in the first place. So once again, Peter, that goes back to an earlier comment. If you can afford to give this to charity, or give your collection to charity, well, why not? I often remember a few years back, it's about 5 years ago now, the editor of the Penguin Collectors Society at the time, he was called Steve Hare. He was a really friendly and likeable chap, and I met him a couple of times, spoke to him many times on the phone, and he very sadly died quite young. I think he was possibly 60, but he wasn't very old, and he had an absolutely astounding penguin collection, and he'd obviously left instructions about what to do, because I think what happened was, I think he had about, it may have been 12, 13, 14,000 different penguins, vintage penguin, because that was his specialty. And they all got, the whole collection was put into a university library. So they've got now the Steve Hare penguin collection, which people, academics, can go and look at the books and do research on the back of them, which is absolutely fantastic. And then all the stuff that was doubled up, because it did loads and loads of doubles, they went to a dealer and who put a catalogue out of Steve's spare stuff. There is, in my hometown of Plymouth, there is actually the university where another named collection of the first 1,000 penguins was donated when that chap died, and they're now on display in Plymouth University, penguins 1 to 1,000. They've made a real feature of them. They're behind purpose-built glass shelving. They look absolutely gorgeous. And that's another thing that you can do if you're not too worried about the monetary value of them. If that's not a concern, then maybe a donation to a library or museum might be an option. The other option is, if you do want a charity to benefit, well, just gift it to a charity in your will. It's not a difficult thing to do, but you'd want to check first that they're actually prepared to take it. So Oxfam, for example, in the UK, I know all around the country, when potentially rare books, get donated into an Oxfam shop, they're not put on sale in that store. They're then sent to a central depot where they're looked over by experts before anything goes out for sale. Incredible stuff is turned up that way. But just, you'd want to check first before thinking, well, I'm just going to leave it all to the, Cats Protection League or something. Are they geared up to be able to even sell it? So something else to consider. M. Bathrick says, I'm willing them to a bookseller friend. Well, that's brilliant. If you know a friend who's going to appreciate them and you just want to say, well, look, when I die, all this will be yours. Well, all well and good. I would still probably just check with the friend first of all, unless, particularly if it's a sizable collection, because you may end up inadvertently burdening them with a huge collection that they've suddenly got to, find space for, or that they may not have, but suddenly it's theirs. So, just think about that. Marky Bug, Kira Cody, a small collection of books, CDs, DVDs, model VWs. Guess my wife would charity them all. No pockets in a shroud. So, Mark, it's a good point. I do know of a collector, and as I said, I've been speaking to collectors about this very issue for a few years now, and some of these collectors are older than myself, and I've said, this is an absolutely amazing collection. What happens when you die? And I won't be naming any names, but one collector who I was quite surprised at said, well, my daughter will probably come around with a big skip and just chuck it all in the skip. And I was like, what? Have you made literally no provision for what to happen to this stuff? A lot of it unique, for when you die. I said, no, nothing. I thought, wow. So I was really, really surprised. There are other collectors who've got maybe nobody to pass it on to. And I think, well, if that was me and I didn't have any offspring, I didn't have any family, I still wouldn't want it just to go into landfill, or for whoever ends up with it, for it to go through a local auction, or for people to start fighting over it. I would want something to happen to it. I would want some sort of plan in place, and maybe just choose my favourite charity. So maybe similar to what we've been suggesting, have a little list. In the event of my death, please contact such and such for the book collection, such and such for the records, such and such for the comics, such and such for the toys. Please ask them to come down, make them an offer, make an offer, and that money then go to charity. Maybe that would be one way around it. It's difficult. It is difficult. So Daniel DeVille, 5004 says, right now I am donating many of the books that I've already read to the local library. My problem is space. I will keep the books and toys that I think are valuable for my sons to share as they wish after I'm gone. I told them that they can either donate, sell, or keep what I leave behind. Mostly I want others to enjoy what I have collected over the years. I don't have much faith in the continuation of our civilization, at least as we know it, so my collection and others may be all that will be left of a joyous time. Well, I think once again we've touched on it. I definitely want my children to benefit and my wife to benefit from my collection. They've got no interest in carrying on collecting what I collect. So it would be literally no point in them having it around. Take a few pieces that they fancy from the collection, absolutely. But then I would much rather we got it all sold to specialist dealers, this is if I was to die, and they got the money. If it's while I'm alive, certainly in my old age, as I said, I'd like to sell everything bar the books, probably. And even then, as I get older, parts of the book collection will start to go to certain publishers. I think I will just dispose of. So I'm always trickling stuff out the door rather than it coming in. And I'll probably just be left with my absolute core main collection, which will probably be the Penguin books and the Pan collection. I reckon that'll be the last thing that ends up going. Everything else, I'd much rather I sold it all before I died, had the money in, helped my kids out while they're growing up, and have lots of nice holidays off it. I think that would probably be my dream ideal. So Andras6746, I plan on listing the ones that may be worth something so that they have a reference. Well, that's a good point. Simon Proctor. So Simon says, 2 signed copies of a first edition book that I love to be left to my daughters. Realistically, cull as much as possible. Yep, the burden. We've talked about it. And leave the rest to them to share out or pass on. Ideally, not to have to become a book dealer in retirement and needing to fill out tax returns for books bought in the 1980s at book fairs for long forgotten prices. Now, this does raise another issue. Now, I am not a financial expert. I'm not a tax expert. I have an accountant for the YouTube channel, and the stuff that I buy and sell all goes through the accountant now, so I have to declare it all. But in my retirement, do I want to be a book dealer? Do I want to be looking over my shoulder or having to declare tax every year, and having the government take their 20% cut of it? I don't know. I think ultimately, whatever happens, you're going to have to be prepared to take a bit of a hit. The tax man, either through inheritance tax or capital gains tax, is going to have his share. And the amount of capital gains tax, at least in the UK, has your allowance has halved in the last year. And I think it's gone down 75% in the last 3 years. So you're getting squeezed all ways. Now, the rules are different around the world. And as I said, I'm no expert. But you may want to, before you dispose of anything, seek some sort of financial advice about what are the implications. If you sell a toy collection, you've suddenly got £50,000. How much of that do you realistically need to keep back to keep the taxman happy? So that's sort of a question. It is a difficult one, and as I said, the rules vary around the world, but ultimately, it's sort of the price we pay as collectors. We are only custodians of this stuff. We've always said that. We're looking after it for a certain amount of time, then it's off to the next sort of collector. And Simon's point there about buying something in the 80s, probably for quite cheap, and then 40 or 50 years later it might have become quite collectible, worth a considerable amount more than what you paid for it. But the revenue probably aren't going to care about that. They'll just want their whatever percentage from it. The other rule, or something else to think about, is that certainly in the UK, and once again, I did think about making a video on this, but I'm no expert, so I don't want to advise people, but be aware of this, that as of January the 1st, 2025, so if you're watching this prior to 2025, you are at least forewarned. eBay, Etsy, and a lot of those sites where you can sell stuff of your own, if you hit a certain level, so on eBay it's £1,000 worth of sales or 30 eBay transactions, eBay automatically have to report that to the HMRC. So, for an example, you could sell 11 items at £100 each, and that's netted you 1,100 quid before eBay take their fees off. That would then have to be reported at the end of the year by eBay to the HMRC. And then, so say you're in full-time employment and you pay as you earn, you're going to receive a bill from the and you use up your entire allowance during your normal wage, you will receive a bill from the taxman for potentially 20% of that 1,100 that you paid. So you're going to have a bill there for 220 quid that you're probably not going to be expecting. And I think there's going to be an awful lot of people who are in for a very, very big shock. It's all going to be automated, and you're going to have to pay that bill. So this is why on eBay, particularly in the UK, you've seen masses of change recently with regards, completely free listings, list as much as you want pretty much for free. A lot of other integrations as well. It's become very user friendly because last year when this was announced, or earlier this year, there was a massive drop off in people starting to list stuff. And I think that's probably continued. And as soon as it comes in again on January the 1st, 2025, there will be another blaze of publicity and eBay will become a bit of a ghost town. And this does apply to other places where you can sort of sell this stuff, places like Etsy, for example. Which is why I think the toy fairs and also Facebook Marketplace with the dedicated Facebook groups have got much, much busier. Certainly the toy fairs, we've seen plenty of collectors, and this has always been the way, but plenty of collectors have gone to a toy fair or a swap meet or something like that, and they're saying collector to collector. Usually it's cash because they don't take card, and it's under the radar. Now that's a whole black economy. It's like people who sell at the boot sale every week or jumble sale every single week. It's like a black economy that the government are not able to tax, and they want to be able to tax that. So it's probably only a matter of time, at least until Facebook Marketplace itself gets regulated. So I think maybe the advice is sell what you can now whilst it's still possible to sell it without a massive sort of penalty just for selling your own stuff that you may have bought years ago. Right, last few comments. So S. Viscerelli says, I have about 1,000 Blu-rays. Wow, my daughter has expressed interest in inheriting them. If our taste and interests change, I have always thought I would start to sell them off after I reached a certain age. Well, that's fine. You've got 1,000 Blu-rays there. Now, the other law with eBay, certainly in the UK, you've got £1,000, then eBay have to report it. The other law is if you sell 30 items or more, eBay have to report you to the HMRC. So you've got 1,000 there. You're only allowed to sell 30 according to the government, the new law, and you will have to start paying tax on it. It just seems insane. And you would think that the government would just impose a tax at the time of sale rather than have this thing where people are going to be getting bills out the blue like next year for potentially hundreds of pounds that they had no idea were coming, so. Exploring and Walking says, I've already sold off most of my collections, records and retro toys. I do have lots of books, but they are of low value and reading copies mostly. I'm only 48 and I didn't want to burden off leaving stuff behind for others to sort through. So once again, this covers what we said. So, 48 seems quite young nowadays, I suppose, to be getting rid of it. But if you've had it, if you've enjoyed it, and you just don't need it anymore, well, why keep it, I guess. I've got loads more books than I could ever possibly read. But a lot of my other media, I have got shot of old videos. I got rid of DVDs. I've mainly got rid of. I've hardly had any Blu-rays. My record collection's thinned out. Most of my comics are gone. I've only got maybe a few boxes of that. So I have been constantly turning it over because my interests over the decades change. I've not really been buying Xbox stuff now. I love my collection of original Xbox, but I've not really been buying it simply because my boy's grown up. He's now left home. But when he was growing up, we used to play those old classic retro games together, and it was great. It was great fun to collect them, and I've got really good memories on it. But now I've reached a point where, well, what's the point of trying to get more Xbox games? I'm not going to be having real chance to play them with my son anymore. It would be just collecting them for collecting's sake, and I'd much rather put my money into things that I'm really going to enjoy. So I can see the Xbox collection, potentially that may be something that I end up selling fairly soon because, it's been in my life for, 20 years, and now's maybe the time to get shot of it. Right, last couple of comments. So Shady7277. My father has leaving me his record collection, white labels, etc., but it's massive. I will be keeping the rare and good ones and donating the ones I don't want. I don't have spare space. The rare ones, though, I would leave to my son after me. So that sounds absolutely fine, to be honest. Just keep what you love, and like you say, if you want to donate to a charity, if it's good stuff, they're not going to say no, are they? And you'll be helping a good cause, so you're not going to go far wrong there. And the last comment we got here was from Stephen Malay. I'm limited for space, so I'm watching booktubers like yourself and others and use my own judgment on what to read and collect the authors that I like. Well, ultimately, we've always said that, particularly on this channel, is collect what you love, because then in the long run, you're not going to be, disappointed. If, over the years of collecting what you love, those things start to go up in value, then it was a bonus. Certainly when I collected Star Wars, you couldn't give it away. Literally, there were shops that literally could not get it. It was on clearance. That's when I started picking it up because I loved it. The fact that decades later it became such a collectible that it did was just good luck. It wasn't, I didn't plan it. I didn't buy the toys as investment. Not like, sort of more modern collectibles and people who do buy toys for investments. It was just pure luck. I collected it because I loved it. And I reckon a lot of long-time comic collectors did exactly the same. They weren't collecting comics in the 60s because, they thought, well, one day I might be able to, sell these for a few quid. They were buying them because they loved them. And I think that's always been the way. So with any of this stuff, I think if it's got a financial value, as it stands right now, the advice I would give is perhaps clear as much as you can possibly stand to part with whilst you're healthy and you've got the means and the motivation to get rid of it. Enjoy it along the way. I mean, what I tend to do is I'll put some of it towards maybe my kids or to a holiday or something like that. I'll also put some, this is when I sell something from the collection, or I'll put some of those proceeds into buying something new. And I think that's a real good way to do it. But as I said, my personal plan is to just be left with the books eventually and to have cleared most of the merchandise out, and not be a burden to my family when I die, because there's an awful lot of stuff here and nobody wants that. So there you go. A bit of food for thought. Any more comments you think, or any other angles I've not really touched on, do leave a comment down below, because I think this is a sort of the video that has got a long life on it, and it's not a topic that's going to go away anytime soon. We're all of us getting older, and potentially we might need to tread carefully with regards getting a decent monetary value back on our collections. So yeah, but my advice is definitely do it whilst you're still alive, if you can. So there you go. Hope you've enjoyed that, and I hope it's been a bit of a food for thought. Not the usual video that I do, but I think also something that is important and it should be on your radar. So thanks for watching today. If you've not already, do please hit the subscribe button for regular vintage book and collectible content, and I shall look forward to seeing you again very soon. Bye.